You ever have one of those moments where you're handed something so insulting, so absurd, that you don't even feel angry at first? Just numb disbelief? That was me, staring down at a crisp $500 check like it had come from another planet. My name's George, I'm 33 now, and this happened about a year ago, but I remember the exact way the paper felt in my hands. Cheap, like the gesture itself. The kicker? It was from my own parents. My grandfather had just passed, a man I adored, admired, and, more importantly, who had practically raised me. And that check was what they called my share of his $50 million estate. That's right, $50 million. My cut. A week's rent and a slap in the face. To explain how we got there, I have to take you back a bit, back before Grandpa passed, before the money, before the silence. Growing up, I always felt like the outsider in my own family. Not because I was rebellious or troubled, but because I wasn't what my parents wanted. My younger sister, Madison, was the golden child from day one. Straight A's? Sure, but so did I. Captain of her soccer team? Great, but I built a tech startup in college that actually got acquired for a decent sum. News they never bothered to share at family dinner. I was quiet, too independent, and distant, which was their way of saying I didn't kiss the ring. Grandpa Harold, though? He got me. He was a quiet man himself. A sharp, no-nonsense kind of guy who had built a real estate empire from the ground up, starting with a single duplex and working day and night until his name was attached to half the city. He never boasted, never wore flashy suits or drove fancy cars. But he noticed everything. I'd visit him every Sunday once I moved back into town in my late 20s. We'd talk about business, life, philosophy. He had this way of listening that made you feel like what you were saying actually mattered. My parents thought I was wasting my weekends with an old man, but Grandpa used to chuckle and say, "Let them keep underestimating you, Georgie. One day, they'll regret it." I didn't know just how prophetic those words would turn out to be. Things were fine on the surface. Tense, sure, but functional. My parents had never been openly hostile, just distant. Madison and I kept in touch sporadically, mostly during holidays, when she'd show up with designer bags and a new boyfriend, all of whom my parents adored. She always had a way of sucking the oxygen out of a room, and our parents lapped it up like she was the second coming. I played my role, smiled, nodded, answered questions about that tech thing I was doing, even though I'd been in Forbes 30 Under 30 a few years prior. Not that they read it. Then Grandpa died. It was sudden, heart failure in his sleep. Peaceful at least. I got the call from his estate attorney before I heard from my parents. That should have been my first red flag. Mr. Preston, his lawyer, told me that there'd be a formal reading of the will in 2 weeks. He said, "Your grandfather was very deliberate, George. He made sure everything was crystal clear. He spoke highly of you, often." I showed up to the reading in a tailored navy suit. Not flashy, but sharp. I wanted to pay my respects the right way. My parents and Madison were already there, lounging in the massive conference room like they owned the place. My dad gave me a cursory nod. My mom barely looked up from her phone, and Madison gave me that fake, sugary smile she used when she wanted something. The reading itself was oddly tense. Mr. Preston went through the usual pleasantries, then started outlining Grandpa's assets, properties, investments, stock portfolios. My grandfather had been far wealthier than any of us realized. $50 million, spread across real estate, businesses, offshore accounts, and more. My sister sat up straighter. My mom's eyes flicked over to my dad, who had a weird smirk playing on his face. They looked calm. Too calm. And then came the will. To my daughter Elaine and her husband Robert, Mr. Preston read, "I leave nothing." I swear you could have heard a pin drop. My mother blinked. "What?" Mr. Preston didn't even pause. To my granddaughter Madison, "I leave nothing." Now Madison sat bolt upright. "Wait, what? That can't be right." Again, Mr. Preston kept reading like he'd done this dance before. To my grandson George, "I leave the entirety of my estate, including but not limited to all properties, business holdings, liquid assets, and personal belongings, under the condition that he upholds the values of integrity, humility, and family." There was this eerie silence that fell over the room. Not rage, not shouting, just a stunned, frozen kind of disbelief. I didn't move. I couldn't. My mind was scrambling to catch up to the words I just heard. I inherited everything. All of it. I looked around. My parents sat like statues, pale and blank. Madison was blinking rapidly, like she was trying to reboot her entire understanding of reality. After that, things got messy. Very messy. My parents tried to act like nothing had happened. For 2 days, radio silence. Then I got a message from my dad. "Come by the house. We want to talk." No explanation, no apology. Just that. I went. Maybe I was naive. Maybe some part of me still hoped this was all a mistake, and we could talk it through like adults. I pulled up to the same house I grew up in, the one Grandpa helped them buy, and walked in. They were waiting in the kitchen, sitting around the island like they were holding court. My mom didn't even say hello. She just slid the check across the granite surface. "This is your share, George." I stared at it. $500. 500. I blinked. "Excuse me." My dad's voice was cold, clipped. "You know Harold wasn't in his right mind. We've spoken to our lawyer. There's a clause in the will that we're contesting. It's just a formality. But we're offering you this as a gesture of goodwill." Madison piped in from the side, arms crossed. "It's more than fair, George. Don't be ungrateful." Ungrateful? Something inside me snapped. Not in a loud, explosive way. Just a quiet, clean break. The kind of clarity you don't come back from. I looked at the check, then back at them. "You're serious? You think you're entitled to something my grandfather specifically said was mine?" My mother's eyes flashed. "We're family. He was manipulated. You took advantage of him." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Manipulated? I visited him every week. I helped manage his portfolio. I was there when he went into the hospital. I was the one who found the home nurse after his hip surgery. They hadn't even called him on his last birthday. I folded the check in half, then again, and set it down carefully in the middle of the table. "See you in court." That was 6 months ago. I wish I could tell you they backed off after that. That some small part of them realized they'd overplayed their hand, and maybe, just maybe, they should respect my grandfather's wishes and move on. But you don't know my parents. Backing off would require self-awareness, humility, and if there's one thing my family has always lacked, especially my mother, it's the ability to admit they're not the smartest people in the room. I walked out of their house that day with my hands shaking, not from fear, but from fury, the kind that simmers just below the surface and burns hotter the longer it sits. I didn't say another word to them, didn't turn back when my mom shouted after me, "This isn't over." I knew it wasn't. I just didn't know how low they'd be willing to go. The first strike came a week later. I was working from home. Ironic, really, since I'd just finished a call about launching a new investment firm using part of the inheritance money, when I got an email from the law office representing my parents. They were officially contesting the will on grounds of mental duress, diminished capacity, and undue influence. In other words, they were claiming I manipulated my grandfather into leaving everything to me. The kind of claim that might work if there wasn't an ironclad will, multiple witnesses, and a video recording of Grandpa reading the will out loud with full cognition. He was sharper than most 30-year-olds on the day he signed it. But facts didn't matter to them. Just delay, obstruction, and most of all, punishment. Because that's what this was. A punishment. Not just for inheriting the money, but for refusing to roll over when they offered me scraps. They weren't trying to win. They were trying to exhaust me. Emotionally, financially, legally. I told Mr. Preston to proceed with a formal defense. I wasn't backing down. Over the next few weeks, the gloves came off. It started with family friends, people I hadn't heard from in years, messaging me on Facebook, asking what was going on. Some were polite. Most weren't. I got messages like, "Hey George, your mom says you took advantage of your grandfather when he was sick. That true?" Or, "Your sister told us the will wasn't legit and you're trying to keep everything for yourself. Doesn't sound like you." And my personal favorite, "Wow, 50 million and you're not even giving your own family a penny? That's cold, man." They were planting seeds, poisoning the well, making me out to be some greedy, conniving opportunist who swooped in during Grandpa's last days like a vulture. Never mind the truth. Never mind the years I spent by his side while they were off vacationing in Aspen or wine tasting in Napa. I stopped responding, deleted Facebook, locked down my social media, changed my phone number. It felt like I was peeling away pieces of my life just to breathe. But it wasn't just social sabotage. No, that would be too easy. A month after the will reading, I found out my parents had approached one of Grandpa's former business partners, someone I'd been negotiating with to co-invest in a new real estate venture. They told him I was under investigation for fraud. Fraud. They handed him some documents that I can only describe as laughably fake. A printout of a fake email thread that looked like it was made in Microsoft Paint and a screenshot of a supposed bank transfer from one of Grandpa's accounts to mine. Both completely fabricated. The deal fell through. The partner backed out. Said he didn't want any drama. I couldn't blame him. Then Madison got involved in a way that shocked even me. She called me one afternoon. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the better of me. "George," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "I think we should talk." "About what?" I said flatly. "About all of this. The money. The family. We don't have to go to war over it." I let her talk. She went on about how the will was probably a mistake, how Grandpa loved all of us and would have wanted things to be fair, how she was willing to be the bigger person and help me distribute the assets in a way that doesn't tear the family apart. I didn't say a word, just listened. Then she said, "Look, I'm getting married soon. I want you at the wedding. Mom and Dad do too. We can make this right. Let's just talk. Maybe you can put some of the properties in my name and we can forget this ever happened." I laughed. I couldn't help it. It just burst out of me. "You want me to give you property," I said. "So you'll invite me to your wedding?" She got quiet. "I'm not buying my way into this family," I said. "I already know where I stand." She hung up without another word. 2 days later, I got served. They'd escalated the legal battle. Filed an injunction to freeze part of the estate's assets, claiming I was disposing of property and acting against the fiduciary intent of the will. Which, of course, was nonsense. Every move I made was legally approved and documented by Mr. Preston. But it worked. Some of my accounts were temporarily locked. Deals paused. Projects delayed. They were trying to bleed me dry. Not of money. I had more than enough to weather a legal storm, but of energy. Of willpower. Of peace. The real breaking point came during Grandpa's memorial fundraiser. You see, a few months before he passed, Grandpa had told me he wanted to set up a scholarship fund for underprivileged students interested in urban development. He'd grown up poor and always believed education was the great equalizer. He never got to finalize the paperwork, but I honored his wish. I launched the Harold Jennings Foundation with a $1 million donation and organized a gala to kick it off. Press, donors, alumni, the works. And, against my better judgment, I invited my family. I didn't do it for reconciliation. I did it because I knew, deep down, Grandpa would have wanted them there. They showed up, all right. Late, loud, and dressed like they were attending a nightclub, not a charity gala. Madison wore a glittery gold dress that screamed, "Look at me." My father refused to shake my hand. My mother air-kissed donors like she was the one footing the bill. The speeches began. I stood on stage, told the story of how Grandpa taught me to survey a lot when I was 12, how he used to say, "Buildings are easy. Building people, that's the real work." People smiled, clapped. I felt proud. And then Madison got up. No one had asked her to speak. She grabbed the mic like it belonged to her and launched into some bizarre, rambling monologue about how our grandfather had always said family comes first, and how some people forget that when they come into money. She smiled right at me as she said it. Then my mom stood and started crying. Not real tears, Oscar-level crocodile sobs. "He was everything to us," she sniffled. "And now we're just being erased. Forgotten." The room was dead silent. I stood, took the mic back, and said calmly, "Grandpa left everything to me because he knew exactly who you are. And now, so does everyone else." The next day, tabloids ran with it. Family feud at Millionaire's Memorial Gala. Suddenly the story wasn't just internal. It was everywhere. Investors, clients, friends, all reading headlines about a messy, public inheritance war. But you know what? That night didn't break me. It clarified everything. This wasn't just about money. It never was. It was about power, legacy, control. And they hated that Grandpa had handed it all to me. Not because I manipulated him, but because I earned it. And they couldn't stand the fact that for once, they didn't get to write the ending. That's when I made a decision. If they wanted a war, they were going to get one. But not the kind they expected. I wasn't going to play defense anymore. And the first move? Well, that started with digging into a few documents Mr. Preston had quietly handed me the day of the will reading. Documents I hadn't looked at, until now. Documents that changed everything. Rock bottom doesn't always look like losing everything. Sometimes, it looks like standing in a multi-million-dollar penthouse you technically own, staring at your reflection in floor-to-ceiling glass while your family tears your reputation apart in the press. It looks like checking your phone and seeing texts from old friends you haven't heard from in years, not to check in, but to ask, is it true? It looks like wondering if this whole war is worth it, even when you're legally in the right, morally justified, and, frankly, richer than ever. That's where I was in the weeks following the gala. After the chaos my family stirred up at the foundation event, the headlines spread like wildfire. Local outlets picked it up first, then national. Real estate heir accused of manipulating dying grandfather. Sister denied inheritance speaks out. Family fortune sparks legal firestorm. The worst part? They weren't quoting any facts, just opinions, insinuations, and strategically placed anonymous sources. I don't know if it was my mom, my dad, Madison, or some PR firm they hired behind the scenes, but someone was feeding them exactly what they needed to twist the narrative. At first, I tried to ignore it. I'd been taught by Grandpa to stay above the noise. Never wrestle with pigs, Georgie, he used to say. You both get dirty, but only one of you enjoys it. But that philosophy only works when people believe the truth will rise to the surface. When they're hungry for gossip, scandal, and family drama with dollar signs attached, the truth gets buried fast. I was scheduled to close 2 major investment deals that month, both partnerships with reputable firms in Chicago and Austin. Both pulled out within days of the media frenzy. They didn't want to be tied to someone embroiled in a public inheritance dispute. I couldn't blame them. It looked messy, risky, and the worst part? I knew I was right. I had every receipt, every legal signature, every video-recorded confirmation of my grandfather's intent. But none of it mattered in the court of public opinion. I started losing sleep. My diet went to hell. I was working from home less and less, choosing instead to wander through the city in a hoodie and sunglasses like some guilty celebrity, trying to avoid stares and whispers. Even the employees at the Jennings Tower, the flagship high-rise Grandpa and I renovated together, began to look at me differently. One concierge, who used to smile every time I walked in, wouldn't even make eye contact. But it wasn't the press, or the business losses, or even the social isolation that broke me. It was a voicemail. A 2-minute message from a man named Lewis, a quiet, elderly tenant who lived in one of the original buildings Grandpa had built back in the 70s. I used to visit that complex with Grandpa on Saturdays when I was a kid. He'd bring bags of groceries to the older tenants, help fix broken locks or leaky faucets, even if he had a full staff who could have done it for him. He believed in looking people in the eye, being present. I'd once asked him why he didn't just sell the building and cash out. Because these walls fed me, Georgie, he said. You don't abandon the ones who fed you. Lewis's voice cracked as he spoke on the message. I don't know what's going on with your folks, son, but Harold always spoke so proudly of you. Said you had the heart for this business, not just the brains. I see what the papers say, but I don't believe them. I just wanted you to know, not everyone does. I sat on the floor of my apartment and cried for the first time in years. Not loud, heaving sobs, just quiet tears that kept falling, like a faucet left on too long. It wasn't just grief. It was shame. I'd let them shake me. I'd let them take my peace, my reputation, my purpose. For weeks, I'd been playing defense, reacting to attacks, dodging headlines, shrinking from my own legacy. That night, I made a choice. No more hiding. No more silence. No more letting them define me. I started by calling Mr. Preston. I want to go on the offensive, I said. But not with lawyers. With the truth. Over the next few days, I rebuilt. Slowly. Quietly. First, I reconnected with the tenants of the Jennings legacy buildings. I showed up in person. No press. No photographers. Just me, dressed in jeans and a button-down, knocking on doors and asking how things were going. I brought groceries to some of the elderly residents, repaired a faulty gate that had been left untouched for weeks, and replaced a broken vending machine with a new one that offered drinks for free. Word traveled fast. People started smiling again. The concierge at Jennings Tower nodded at me for the first time in weeks. Then I launched the foundation's community wing early, months before we were scheduled. I donated another $500,000 anonymously to start after-school programs in 2 underserved neighborhoods. The media didn't pick it up. I didn't want them to. I wasn't doing it for headlines. I was doing it because it felt like Grandpa was watching. And then there were the documents Mr. Preston had given me, the ones I hadn't looked at until everything fell apart. Inside the thick envelope were handwritten letters, some addressed to me, some to Mr. Preston, and one, sealed in red wax, marked simply, in case they fight. It was from Grandpa, dated 6 months before he died. The letter inside was short, less than a page, but it said everything. George, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I hope they'd let it go. But I know my daughter. I know Madison. And I know what money does to people who never earned it. You earned this. Not because you wanted it, but because you cared. Not just about me, but about the people behind the buildings. Use it wisely. But if they come for you, don't flinch. You have everything you need to win. HJ. Attached to the letter was a notarized document authorizing access to a private video file stored in Mr. Preston's office server. It was Grandpa, sitting in his favorite armchair, wearing his old cardigan, eyes clear as ever. The video started with him holding a newspaper with that day's date. No one made me do this, he said. My mind is sound, my heart is clear. I'm leaving everything to George because he's the only one who earned it. He's the only one who sat with me when my legs didn't work, who asked questions when the others asked for checks. He's the only one who understood this wasn't just about money. It was about building something that lasts. He paused, looked straight into the camera. If they challenge this, George, you fight back. And you remind them who built this empire. Not for bloodlines. For legacy. That video changed everything. I sent a copy to my legal team and gave them permission to submit it in the upcoming hearing. It wasn't just a will. It was testimony. And yet, I still didn't feel like I'd won anything. Not really. Not yet. I needed to rebuild something bigger. So I called every investor who'd pulled out. Every partner who'd gone quiet. Every advisor who told me to lie low. And I told them I wasn't going anywhere. I set up a new firm. Not just for profit, but for legacy. We called it Brick and Bone, a name Grandpa used to say when describing buildings that had stood the test of time. I brought in 2 young developers from Chicago who'd grown up in housing projects and worked their way up from construction crews. I gave them equity. I started showing up to city council meetings again, advocating for mixed-income housing, sustainable renovation projects, and tenant-first policies. Not for attention, for impact. One night, as I was locking up the Brick and Bone office, I found a letter tucked under the door. It was from one of my former business professors. He'd seen the headlines, read the court filings, and wanted to offer his support. But more than that, he enclosed a copy of a recommendation letter Grandpa had written about me, unsolicited, back when I was applying to grad school. He has the heart of a builder, the letter said, and a spine made of stone. If you don't admit him, it'll be your loss, not his. For the first time in months, I smiled. Not because I'd won yet, but because I wasn't broken anymore. They thought they could corner me, shame me, bury me, but they forgot something critical. I was Harold Jennings' grandson, and I don't crumble. The court date was set, just a few weeks away. And what my parents didn't know? I had one more card to play. One more secret Grandpa left behind. Something even Mr. Preston didn't know I'd found. And when I revealed it, everything would change. They always say revenge is best served cold, but I think that's wrong. Cold revenge is messy. It's hasty, impulsive, all emotion and no control. Real revenge, the kind that hits them where it hurts, the kind that leaves them stunned and speechless, takes planning, precision, patience. And patience, I had in spades now. After rebuilding myself and brick and bone from the ashes of my family's smear campaign, I wasn't just standing again. I was stronger, wiser, calmer. The public storm was starting to quiet. The media attention had waned. Once people realized I wasn't the villain they'd been fed by press releases and drama-hungry gossip columns, they moved on to juicier scandals. I let the silence work in my favor. But I didn't forget. Not the check. Not the fake documents. Not the public ambush at the foundation gala. Not the betrayal of my own blood. So when the court date finally landed on the calendar, a Monday morning in late spring, I knew it was time to stop playing defense entirely. I was going to dismantle them. But not just with evidence. Not just with truth. I wanted to take everything they built their ego on, their illusion of power, their entitlement, their public image, and turn it to dust. Not out of spite. Out of justice. Out of a need to balance the scales my grandfather trusted me to protect. And it started with that secret. The one Grandpa had hidden away, buried in the last few drawers of his study. Drawers I hadn't opened until the second week of April. It was a simple envelope. Yellowed with age, sealed shut with brittle wax that cracked as I peeled it open. Inside, a copy of an agreement. A signed, notarized contract. Dated 1989. My grandfather's signature. My mother's. My father's. It was a legal disinheritance agreement. Apparently, long before Madison or I were born, my parents had gotten themselves into serious financial trouble. Gambling debt, business fraud, something messy and unspoken. Grandpa had bailed them out, paid off the creditors, covered the legal mess, and in return, they'd signed away any future claim to his estate. In writing, in front of 2 witnesses. And they'd forgotten all about it. Mr. Preston had never seen it. It must have predated the firm's involvement with Grandpa's affairs. But it was real. And if that wasn't enough, the second document sealed it. A handwritten journal entry, dated 2 weeks before the will was finalized. Elaine and Robert believe I've forgotten 1989. I haven't. I never will. I've kept their secret because I love them. But love has limits. This estate belongs to George. The others had their chance. I sat at Grandpa's old desk and just stared at those words. They had no idea this existed. No clue their challenge to the will was doomed from the start. And that was my advantage. Still, I didn't want to win by simply walking into court and flashing the document like some dramatic movie scene. That would be satisfying, sure, but temporary. The court would rule in my favor, and they'd go home bitter and broke, maybe angrier than before. And worse, they'd keep spinning their story. We were tricked. We were robbed. We were the victims. No, I wanted them to see the truth and feel the consequences. So I devised a plan. First, I needed allies. I called Madison's ex-boyfriend, Jared. We hadn't spoken in years, but I remembered he'd once pulled me aside at a family Christmas party and said, "Man, I don't know how you put up with them. Madison's parents make her 10 times worse." At the time I'd laughed it off, but now, I was curious. He answered on the first ring. "George Jennings." "Wow. You calling to ask me to testify at the trial?" "Would you?" He paused. "Depends. What's in it for me?" "Some closure," I said. "And a favor you can cash in later." He agreed. Not just agreed. He unloaded years of suppressed frustration about how my family had treated him. How my mother had called him a stepping stone. How my father once told him to stay in his lane when he tried to help Madison build her failed online fashion brand. Apparently, they'd promised to back the business with family money, then blamed him when it tanked. He had receipts, emails, texts. One particularly damning voicemail from Madison mocking Grandpa's mental state while discussing how to split the estate before George gets greedy. She didn't even bother hiding it. Next, I reached out to an old friend from undergrad, Carla. She was now a partner at a rising PR firm that specialized in crisis management and narrative reclamation. I asked her to help me tell my story, not in a media frenzy, but in a controlled, deliberate way. She agreed on one condition. I let her see everything. I sent her the documents. The will. The video. The disinheritance contract. Jared's recordings. The voicemail from the tenant, Lewis. She called me back the next day and said, "George, this is a gold mine." Within a week, she had a plan. We'd launch a short docuseries online, 3 10-minute episodes. Not flashy, not dramatic, just facts. Footage of Grandpa speaking, testimony from tenants, screenshots of documents, Jared's clips, and me, just talking about what he meant to me, how this war wasn't about money, but about honoring his legacy. Let the public see who you are, Carla said, not who your parents say you are. The series would drop the day before the court hearing. Meanwhile, Mr. Preston prepared our legal case with the added firepower of the disinheritance agreement. He kept it quiet, sealed it, in fact, so we could present it at the perfect moment. I trusted him with everything now. He'd become more than Grandpa's lawyer. He was my ally. In the final week before trial, I made one more move. I visited Madison. She answered the door to her new apartment in a bathrobe, holding a green smoothie like it was a trophy. Her eyes narrowed. "Well, look who finally stopped hiding." I kept my hands in my pockets. "Calm. I'm giving you a chance to back down." She laughed. "That's adorable. You don't know everything, Maddie." "Neither do you," she said, slamming the door in my face. Fair enough. But she had no idea I wasn't there to warn her. I was there to watch her. Because behind me, parked on the street, was a black SUV with 2 film crew members from Carla's company. Discreet. Legal. Filming public spaces only. Documenting my final walk before the trial. Every move was now intentional. Every conversation calculated. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. Not because I was nervous, but because I felt ready. Completely, finally ready. I walked into the courtroom wearing one of Grandpa's old cufflinks. A silver square etched with the letters HJ. A small tribute. My parents were already seated at the front, dressed in somber black like they were mourning their stolen fortune. Madison sat between them, glaring at me like I'd betrayed some unspoken family pact. I didn't look at them. I looked at the judge. Calm, confident, silent. And then, the first domino tipped. The docuseries dropped. Phones buzzed throughout the courtroom. You could feel the shift. The bailiff whispered something to the clerk. One of the reporters in the back furiously scribbled notes. By lunch break, it was trending on Twitter. The public was seeing everything. The truth, the greed, the betrayal, and most importantly, the proof. The setup was complete. Now it was time to deliver the blow. The courtroom was quiet, almost reverent, like the opening scene of a slow-burning drama. The kind where you know something big is about to happen, but no one dares say a word until the moment arrives. The only sound was the rustle of paper and the occasional cough echoing off the polished walls. I sat at the front, next to Mr. Preston, surrounded by carefully prepared binders and legal documents. Across the aisle sat my parents and Madison, dressed like they were attending a funeral, which, in a way, they were. Just not the one they expected. The judge, a composed woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a reputation for cutting through nonsense, called the proceedings to order. She glanced briefly at the growing media presence behind us, but didn't let it distract her. If she'd seen the docuseries that dropped that morning, she didn't let it show. "Let's proceed," she said. Their attorney went first. He stood, gave a polished, passionate speech about family, about confusion, about how my grandfather's mental capacity had been in decline during his final year. He called it a tragic misunderstanding, and described the will as uncharacteristically lopsided. He brought up vague stories of Grandpa repeating himself, forgetting small things. He even had the nerve to imply that I'd somehow inserted myself into Grandpa's routine and isolated him from the rest of the family. I kept my face neutral, but my fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Then came their witnesses. First was my mother, taking the stand like a Broadway actress auditioning for a revival of Les Miserables. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue she clearly brought just for the occasion. "I loved my father," she began. "All I ever wanted was to honor his legacy. I never expected anything. But when I heard he left everything to George, I was shocked. We all were. It just didn't make sense. It wasn't who he was." She talked about my distance from the family, claimed I had isolated myself. She even said Grandpa would have been horrified to see what I'd done with the foundation money. That was the moment I saw the judge's eyebrow twitch. Next up was Madison. If Mom was the weeper, Madison was the ice queen. Cold, controlled, condescending. "I'm not here for money," she said. "I'm here because something doesn't feel right. My grandfather always told me I'd help lead the family legacy. He talked about me running the charitable side of his empire. This will, it's not just unfair. It's wrong." Their lawyer rested their side of the case there, confident. Then it was our turn. Mr. Preston stood slowly, adjusting his glasses. "Your Honor, we will be brief. Because the facts are clear." He introduced the official will, signed, witnessed, and notarized, with a statement from the attorney present during its creation. We submitted 3 years of medical records verifying Grandpa's cognitive strength up until the final month of his life. We had video footage of him attending public events, speaking clearly, articulating detailed ideas. But none of that was the real hammer. First, we called Jarrett. He walked up to the stand like he had been waiting his whole life for this moment. He didn't rant, didn't rage. He just spoke plainly about the pressure, the manipulation, the lies. He played the voicemail from Madison. I mean, he's old. George is probably convincing him to do something dramatic. But whatever. When it's all over, we'll fix it. Family money belongs to the family. The courtroom went silent. Then came the disinheritance agreement. Mr. Preston handed it to the judge in a sealed folder, explaining the 1989 financial cover-up. The judge raised her eyebrows slightly as she scanned the signatures. My parents' names, right there in ink. But the final nail? Grandpa's video. We wheeled in a monitor, and the court clerk hit play. There he was. Grandpa, cardigan and all, looking directly into the camera. Calm, clear, intentional. To my grandson George, I leave everything. Because I trust him. I believe in him. Because he earned it. Not through blood, but through loyalty. When the screen went black, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. The judge folded her hands and leaned forward. I've seen enough. She didn't even ask for closing arguments. In light of the overwhelming evidence, including video testimony, notarized agreements, and supporting witness accounts, this court finds that the will is valid and binding. The plaintiff's claims are rejected in full. All legal and financial authority remains with the defendant. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter for civil review regarding attempted estate fraud, slander, and the filing of knowingly false documents. I didn't smile. Not because I wasn't satisfied, but because I knew this wasn't the kind of victory you celebrate with cheers. This was the kind you sit with. The kind you breathe in slowly, feeling its weight settle in your chest after months of war. My parents sat frozen. My mother's face drained of color, her jaw slack. My father leaned back slowly, like someone had punched him in the gut, but he didn't want to show it. Madison just stared straight ahead, unblinking. The fallout began immediately. Reporters swarmed outside the courthouse. Carla's team released a final segment that night. The verdict. It tied everything together. The fake stories, the manipulation, the will, the judgment. Social media lit up with headlines like, he inherited $50 million. They gave him a $500 check. Now they get nothing. Family tried to steal inheritance, forgot they were already disinherited. Grandson's quiet revenge wins in court. But I didn't talk to the press. I didn't gloat. I just got to work. I expanded the Harold Jennings Foundation. We opened a new headquarters downtown. A sleek glass building with a giant mural of Grandpa in the entryway. I added 5 full-time staff members to manage scholarships, housing grants, and youth mentorship programs. Brick and Bone took off like wildfire. With the cloud of scandal gone, investors returned. We secured a multi-city deal that made national news. I offered internships to kids from neighborhoods Grandpa once developed. Kids who reminded me of the boy I used to be. And my family. They unraveled. The fraud review led to investigations into their other businesses. Turns out my father had been cooking books in one of his consulting firms, and the civil suit didn't help his image. Madison lost her influencer deals after the voicemail clip went viral. Brands didn't want to be associated with someone who joked about manipulating an old man. And my mother? Well, she faded. No more garden club presidencies. No more glossy magazine features. At first, they tried to reach out. Emails. Letters. One voicemail from my dad, full of fake humility. We just want to talk, George. We're still family. You've proven your point. But I didn't answer. Because I had nothing left to prove. Months later, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was the $500 check. The original one. The one they'd slid across the table like it was all I was worth. It had been torn in half. No note. Just the broken check. I sat there for a moment, staring at it. Then I picked it up, walked out to the back of my property, where I'd planted a small tree in Grandpa's memory, and buried it beneath the roots. A full circle. A closing chapter. And as the wind picked up through the trees, I thought about the last words he ever said to me, the week before he passed. Legacy's not about money, Georgie. It's about what they remember when you're gone. They'll remember him. And now, whether they like it or not, they'll remember me, too. They gave me $500 to disappear. I gave them the truth, and it cost them everything.